Australia has become complicit in genocide. It has denied asylum to a victim of racist rapist who enjoyed seeing white people suffer. A South African woman, mother, wife and farmer, aged 45, who was shot and repeatedly raped at gunpoint by a racist violent thug who likes to see white people suffer in front of her children, has pleaded for help after her desperate, traumatised family was denied asylum in Australia. She has begged for a lifeline for her and her family. The mother of three, Nicky, was raped by a racist Sebenzile Simane at the family farmhouse in Hankey, South Africa. Simane claimed he likes to see white people suffer and would do it again 1,000 times. The 45-year-old's children were forced to watch their mother being raped and assaulted. Simane molested and tried to rape her 13-year-old daughter and tried to force her son to rape her. Simane was given 173 years in jail for the string of violent crimes. The family hoped to start a new life in Australia, but humanitarian aid and visas were denied by Australia. By denying a humanitarian order of protection for this family, Australia has not only ignored the UN rules on genocide, which state they must give asylum to anyone who is persecuted by the government on the basis of their race. South Africa has over 118 laws, rules, regulations and policies which exclude white people from everything from the workplace, schools, tertiary education, business opportunities, civil employment like police, hospitals, army, sports, etc. But also ignored the fact that this family was targeted because the perpetrator likes to see white people suffer, and they were soft, easy targets on remote farmlands. The government of South Africa has deliberately made it difficult for these farmers to protect themselves by outlawing the commando system and also making gun ownership extremely difficult, if not impossible. The South African government is also removing self-defense as a reason to own a gun. And it seems the Department of Home Affairs in Australia and many other Western countries are perfectly happy with the situation and have no problem seeing it spiral into another Rwanda, where the perpetrators of that genocide were also from the Bantu tribe, like in South Africa, and were also the majority in government, like in South Africa. What will it take for the world to realize their mistake? A mass shooting? Only yesterday I heard of another 3 white families that were denied asylum in Ireland, where an asylum lawyer admitted that asylum is for non-whites only. Seems this is the truth. This South African farmer's wife and mother, who was put through a living nightmare by a racist rapist who held a gun to her children's head and forced her into sex, has pleaded for help after her family were denied asylum in Australia. Nicky, 45, was raped in front of her children by 32-year-old Sebenzile Simane, who also sexually molested her daughter after shooting his way into the Eastern Cape farmhouse. After surviving the horrific ordeal, Nicky and her family were planning to flee to Australia to set up a farm, but their humanitarian visas were rejected by the Australian government. All this despite Officer Pete Smith's testimony that he had to take a day off the day he escorted Sebenzile Simane to court. Smith had said, "He told me he had no regret whatsoever and he would do it again 1,000 times more if he could. He told me he likes to see white people suffer. That man has the devil inside of him. He was smiling at me like he had accomplished something very great," Smith said. He went to see a therapist after his brief encounter with Sebenzile Simane. The mother of 3 said her family began dreaming of a new life when Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton said he was considering a special refugee intake for South Africans who had been persecuted. She said those dreams have now been destroyed. "It was a glimmer of hope, but it's concerning that nothing has ever come of it," she told the Australian. "I speak for thousands of South African farmers. We need a lifeline. The violence in South Africa is escalating." On March 23, 2018, a stream of bullets came blasting through the patio door, narrowly missing the head of the couple's son. The family home was so remote that their nearest neighbor was a mile away and did not hear the gunshots. Describing her ordeal, Nicky revealed how she felt as though they were being hunted like wild animals. "What followed I can only describe as 4 hours of pure hell, just sick torture and depravity. He held a gun to her youngest son's head and threatened to shoot him unless she complied. Silent tears rolled down his cheeks for the next 4 hours. He tied us all up with fencing wire so tight that our hands lost their circulation and turned grey, she said. He shouted at my children that he was there to kill their father and that he would chop him up in front of them. He said that when he came through the door they would watch him get butchered. He then repeatedly threatened to shoot my eldest son's feet off if he didn't obey him, and then ordered my son to rape me. I had never heard such a sick thing before and was totally mortified. All I could do was beg him not to make my son rape me. He just kept pointing the gun at my son's feet and saying he would shoot them unless he raped his mum in front of his brother and sister. Nicky begged and pleaded with him before he grabbed her and forced her to the bedroom where she was raped. There was blood everywhere as I had already been badly shot. I could do nothing as my hands were tied behind my back. He then brought my 13-year-old daughter to the bedroom, undressed her and attempted to rape her. He was sexually molesting her and all I could do was beg for mercy and to take me again. So instead of raping her, he forced my beautiful daughter to watch as he raped me again. He then fled and tried to start the car outside, but couldn't get it going. So, in a bid to buy her family more time, she told him to take her bank cards and PIN numbers and to let her drive him to town to the ATM. Clearly, robbery was not his prime motive, as she had to suggest it to him. Just before midnight, she drove into town and got him 4,000 rand. It's about 411 Australian dollars. He then told her to drive to a quiet spot until after midnight, when the ATM would allow him to use the card again. He undid my seatbelt and told me to recline the seat so he could rape me again, but I was so weak from the loss of blood, I told him that if he raped again, I would almost certainly bleed to death. I told him it was 12:04 a.m. and that the ATM would give him another 4,000 rand, and to please just take my cards and take his money and let me drive to a hospital where I could get help. Once he was out of the car, she hit the accelerator and drove back to the farm and found the children had freed themselves and called a neighbor and that help had arrived. She said the saddest part of the ordeal was that they can never give their children their innocence back. That creature took it. The children and I will never be able to live on that farm again. The mother and her children now live in the city where their husband visits them at weekends. He is living there alone until the property is sold and keeps a loaded shotgun at his side. Judge Olaf Renarsson, passing sentence at the Eastern Cape High Court in Port Elizabeth, branded Simane as a cruel and barbaric and a predator who targeted a woman and her children. He was given 2 life sentences plus 137 years after being found guilty of 17 offences, including 2 of rape, 4 of attempted murder, attempted rape, and compelling a child to watch a sex act. He was also added to the sex register. Eastern Cape Police Commissioner Liziwe Chiga said dedication and a thorough investigation contributed to making sure this heartless criminal was removed from society for a very long time. She said this case must serve as a strong deterrent to perpetrators of such crimes, as the South African police regard the safety and security of the farming community as a priority. But that is what you would expect to hear from a corrupt and inept police service that has been implicated in many crimes and even farm murders. Civil servants in South Africa are appointed on a cadre deployment scheme, which means that if you vote for the ANC, you get a job in the civil service. That's police, hospital, army, etc., etc., immaterial of your qualifications or abilities. This communist policy is official policy for the South African regime. When handing down sentencing, Judge Olaf Renarsson said he found no compelling or substantial circumstances to deviate from the minimum prescribed sentences when he sentenced Sebenzile Simane to a total of 173 years for the crimes he committed. Nicky and her husband Hein, 44, have been forced out of their farmhouse. Their 3 children aged 10, 14 and 16 have been too terrified to return. A spokesperson for the Australian Department of Home Affairs said the department does not comment on individual cases. All applications are considered on a case-by-case basis against relevant legislative criteria, as humanitarian cases can be complex from the decision-making perspective. Applications can take an extended period to resolve. Campaign group AfriForum said Afrikaner and European farmers were under daily attack in the country. AfriForum councillor Magda Kutsia, who provides support to complainants in farm attack cases, described the mother as an iron lady. Kutsia said her role was to provide light and hope to victims and to encourage them to embrace life after traumatic incidents. About 22 farmers have already been murdered in South Africa this year, and 195 farms have been attacked. In recent years, between 55 and 75 farmers are brutally killed every year. Many of the attacks involve horrific torture, including farmers being burned with hot irons, boiling water poured over their head and body, the use of power tools, and gang rape before murder. Clearly, this is not things you do when your only motive is robbery. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa insists there are no farm murders in South Africa. And while the South African government insists the chief motive was robbery and that it was not a specific attack on whites or farmers, but that they are very vulnerable and easy targets due to their remoteness, this case clearly has a racial motive. Mr. Dutton had claimed white South Africans needed special attention and asked his department to accept and consider applications from South Africa in July last year. This came after a controversial push from Liberal MPs in Australia for an intake of up to 10,000 persecuted South African farmers. If people are being persecuted, regardless of whether it's because of religion or the colour of their skin or whatever, we need to provide assistance where we can, he told 2GB Radio in March last year. He said people make the point on occasion that we're too generous. But in this circumstance, we do have to look at the persecution that's taking place. We have a huge South African expat community within Australia. They work hard, they integrate well into Australian society. They contribute and make us a better country, and they're the sort of migrants that we want to bring into our country. AfriForum spokesman Ian Cameron said Nicky and her children were lucky to be alive, but will have to live with a lasting trauma after a 4-hour ordeal and a psychological torture. A recent opinion poll conducted by the Institute for Race Relations in South Africa found that 54% of white people questioned said that they had experienced racism, while only 36% of black people in South Africa said that they did. The results were presented in an article published by Times Live. This is but one of many horrendous examples, as tens of thousands of lucky South Africans who do manage to flee the country leave as soon as they can. A country where 57 people are murdered every day. It is difficult to get into any country with a South African passport, and even doing it illegally, which seems to work so well for many non-whites around the world, does not work for white South Africans.